Hi everyone, welcome to another session of Ask the Egg Whisperer. I'm Dr. Amy and I'm so glad you're here. Every week I start off by reading the pre-submitted questions that come in through asktheeggwhisperer.com, and then I take your live chatted questions from Instagram. I want to remind you, wherever you are in your fertility journey, you are not alone. Every question matters, and by asking, you're helping yourself and others who might be going through something similar. My hope is that you leave today, after listening to this session, feeling a little bit more informed, a little bit more empowered, and a lot more hopeful. So let's get started with today's questions. First question comes from Rachel, 33, from the East Coast. Hi, Dr. Amy. I'm 33, my FSH is 45, AMH is 0.12. I have a history of IUD removal, recurrent miscarriages, and 1 ovary removed. Have you seen anyone with these levels get pregnant? Is there a way to improve AMH or preserve fertility? What IVF path would you recommend? So Rachel, you're one of my people. And what I mean by that is I see patients like you all the time. When I approach a case, I approach it with practical positivity. So I do believe in being hopeful. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors, they spin things in a way that make us feel negative and make us feel like we don't have a chance. But I can tell you that I have patients who've had FSH levels in the 90s. The highest FSH level that I've seen in a patient of mine who has been successful with IVF, true story, was 120, and she was around your age. So I'll share with you some of the things that I did for her for you to consider with your doctor. So one of the things that I did for her is I put her on HRT. So that's hormone replacement therapy. And the purpose of this is to reduce your FSH level to hopefully make your ovaries more responsive. The second thing I did was I asked her to take supplements like an NAD booster. One of them could be like OVA NAD Plus and CoQ10. The other thing that I did was I had her start taking HGH, so human-derived growth hormone, twice a week. Now, some of these things your doctor might be used to. I'm not sharing things that a lot of doctors don't do. A lot of doctors do these things. But now I'm going to share some things that might be a little bit outside the box. One of them is ovarian PRP. So in a patient who had an FSH over 90, I actually did all of these things and then a session of ovarian PRP, and then I did an egg retrieval on her. She's now coming back to me for her second baby. But I don't want to give you false hope, mislead you, or misguide you, and make you think that if you do these things, it's going to work. Because I've had patients where I've tried 3 egg retrievals to finally get a strong embryo. And I've had patients who are even able to bank embryos at your age. One thing that I've been doing more recently, and I've had experience in patients with your story, is the use of a repurposed drug called rapamycin. It's an anti-aging drug. Well, it's not really. It's FDA approved for the prevention of organ transplant rejections. It's been used in the anti-aging space longer than it's been used in the fertility space, and I've been using it in my practice for 2.5 years. This medication may increase your AMH and your follicle count and may give you more chances longer. So if you are my patient, I would encourage you to just show up. I would say, let's give this 6 months. And if after 6 months we don't feel like we've gotten anywhere, then we can start thinking about other options. But I do think that you are a candidate for fertility preservation and IVF with your story. And there's one particular reason why. You're 33 years old. So at 33, even if you have a low number of eggs and you might be close to running out, your 33 egg is going to behave a lot better than, let's say, someone who normally has these levels at an older age. So you don't have the eggs of, let's say, a 50-year-old woman. Sometimes I hear patients are being told this by their well-intentioned doctors. You still have the eggs of a 33-year-old, but you don't have many left. So I take advantage of what's going on right now. Find a doctor that believes in you and your chances, and consider some of the therapies that I just brought up. So the next question comes from Amy in Florida, 43 years old, and her question is this. My AMH is 0.23, FSH is 17, I have an ovarian cyst and a partial septate uterus. The doctor recommends surgery but says IVF would be unethical due to poor chances and suggests IUI. Do you agree? So I don't believe IVF is ever unethical. I do think it's unethical for a doctor to offer IVF if they don't believe that in their hands they're well suited to give you a good chance. So if you have a doctor that says that to you, what they're saying is, I haven't had an experience where I can help someone in your situation. So I would find another doctor that's like super excited to help you, like me. And there are other doctors just like me who would see your story and say, I would like to give you a chance. So your chances are probably around 5% or so at 43. That doesn't sound very high, I know, but eventually it happens to all of us. Our chances will go down to 0. So you're in a situation right now where you still have eggs, your fertile window is still open, and you just don't know what's going to happen unless you try. So to answer your question, I would not agree with that statement that doing IVF is unethical on a 43-year-old, and I would consider removing the septum right away. And the reason is that the septum, I don't know what that is. The septum could interfere with even natural chances. So depending on how large the septum is and what kind of septum you have, whether it's muscular or not, the septum could decrease your chances of an implantation even when naturally trying. And so what I tell my patients who are doing IVF with me is to try with every ovulation. And so as long as that septum is there, it might be harder to get pregnant naturally. You just never know when you're going to ovulate that golden egg. So I would find a minimally invasive gynecologic surgeon. I wouldn't delay doing IVF while you're trying to do surgery. I would prioritize both IVF and surgery and potentially do an IVF cycle, then do surgery as you're resting, and then the next cycle, try again. And it might take several cycles for you to get an embryo that's strong enough to transfer. And unless you remove the septum, you wouldn't have a chance for a fresh embryo transfer. Freezing your embryos would be your only option. So the next question comes from Lisa, 32, from Maryland. And here's her question. I'm almost 33. I've been trying to conceive for 2 years now. I've had 3 failed IUIs. My first transfer of a euploid AA blastocyst embryo failed. I did a modified natural cycle. I have stage 1 endometriosis. I was offered Orilissa. Should I try it? So for those of you who are joining us who don't quite know all the definitions of the words that I just mentioned, I'm just going to break it down. So she's been trying for 2 years. She tried a fertility treatment that involves taking the sperm and putting it at the top of the uterus. And then she did IVF. She froze embryos and she made 3 embryos. And the first one did not work. She tried a modified natural cycle, which means her body ovulated or her ovary ovulated, and they timed the transfer off of that. And what her doctor is recommending is a medication to suppress endometriosis and decrease inflammation before her next FET. So here's what I would consider. So I would take the number of embryos you have and ask the question, do we have enough embryos for the family size that you want? Would it make sense to actually do another IVF cycle now before you address endometriosis? I do think addressing endometriosis is really important. The only way I think we would know that you have stage 1 is if you've done a laparoscopy. But if you have not, it might not be a bad idea to consider that, because doing a laparoscopy could actually remove the inflammation a lot better than what medical treatment can do. And then removing the endometriosis surgically, it's called excision, could actually give you a better chance of getting pregnant naturally. So you would keep the embryos you have frozen for a future pregnancy and potentially improve your chances of getting pregnant with IUI or naturally. So the other things that I do for patients who've had a euploid transfer that didn't work is I look for endometritis, which is a silent infection in the uterus. I consider endometrial receptivity testing. I also think about immune factors and clotting factors. And I also think about other supportive things like Neupogen, uterine PRP, as well as supplementation with L-arginine, vitamin E, and the antihistamine protocol, just to, share some of the things that I do. So if you have 2 embryos left, it makes sense to have a very detailed plan going into your next transfer, especially if you want 2 children, because it seems like you would have the number of embryos for the family size that you want, and we have to be very careful and thoughtful about how you approach your next transfer. So the next question comes from Michaela, age 36, from Massachusetts. My AMH is 0.49, FSH is 15. My partner has 1 frozen sperm vial, 3 failed IVF rounds with poor development. What next? Okay, so if you have 1 frozen sperm vial, I'm making an assumption that maybe this sperm was extracted from the testicle. I could be wrong. What I'm also wondering is if the poor blast development may not be egg-driven, but could be sperm-driven. What you might want to consider is timing your next egg retrieval with a fresh sperm extraction. You might have a higher chance of getting viable embryos. But when you have the experience of embryos not growing beyond a certain point, one of the things that I consider is a fresh embryo transfer. I also talk about things like calcium activation, if not already used, as well as including supplements that might help support egg quality like CoQ10, OVA NAD, and possibly growth hormone to improve egg quality. I also look at the protocol and ask myself the question, should we change the protocol? Would you benefit from a gentler stim with fewer medications? With your hormone levels, it can make you feel like, there's something wrong or you're running out of eggs. But you're only 36. Your FSH and AMH don't define you. They don't tell us you don't have good eggs left. So I would track and trend these levels, and I already talked about some of the things that I do that are outside the box for patients who have a lower egg supply in the first question that I answered today. So maybe consider some of those things. This next question comes from Serbia. Bojana is age 45. She has 4 frozen day 3 embryos and has had multiple failed transfers. Lining around 6 millimeters. The doctor insists on doing natural cycles with no estrogen. And her question is, should I push for estrogen? So Bojana, you and I are speaking the same language. And what I mean by that is you told us that you have a thin lining. So when you're doing embryo transfers, you want a plush, cushy, beautiful, fluffy landing pad for that embryo when you're doing the transfer. A lining of 6 millimeters for me just doesn't cut it. It isn't enough. So if I'm making a decision to do a transfer at 6 millimeters, it's because I've had the conversation with the patient. She understands that her pregnancy rates will be lower and she still wants to do it. Do you know how often that happens? Almost never. I have to be able to go to sleep at night knowing that I gave every single patient and their embryo the best chance of implantation. So my goal is aligning over 7 millimeters. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes. I would advocate for estrogen support to see if you can build up your lining that way. I also use uterine PRP in my practice as another way of building the lining. Red light therapy and high-dose L-arginine and vitamin E can sometimes also help. So these are things that you might want to talk to your doctor about to see if they can support you with that. If you're doing straight natural cycles, no ovulation augmentation, you might also want to consider augmenting your ovulation by ovulating more than 1 egg. So let's say there's 2. You're going to have 2 sources of naturally produced estrogen and then also progesterone. So you'll hopefully get a thicker lining naturally by doing that. But supplementing with estrogen doesn't decrease your chances at all. And I think it's a great way to build your lining when your lining is thin. Next question comes from Amanda, 39, from North Carolina. Here's her question. I have unexplained infertility, 1 child after 3 IUIs, now 2 second-trimester miscarriages of normal fetuses. I've had a normal workup, except a placental site nodule treated with antibiotics. Now I'm on my 5th Clomid IUI, only 1 mature follicle per cycle. What else can I do? So Amanda, my heart breaks for you. I actually went into reproductive endocrinology as a subspecialty of OBGYN to help women just like you. My thought process is that it is highly likely that you might have inflammation in the walls of the uterus, and that specifically is called adenomyosis. So what I would like you to do is advocate for yourself and ask your doctor and ask them, do you see any signs of adenomyosis in my uterus? Because adenomyosis could be what's causing these second trimester miscarriages of genetically normal embryos. Given all you've been through, sometimes we learn through the experiences that we have that a uterus, I'm trying to make it separate from you so it's not so personal, that a uterus that has had this experience may not be strong enough to carry a pregnancy themselves. And so what I mean by that is you might want to consider freezing embryos now while you're still 39. And then what you can do is still try the way that you're trying. But if you experience another heartbreaking loss, you might want to consider surrogacy as a way to have a healthy live birth. So I'm bringing that up because I think it might be more efficient, and I don't want you to look back and say, why didn't anyone talk to me about this? And it's possible that someone did bring it up, but I'm just going to tell you now that I think it would be helpful to get your fertility levels checked, think about egg quality support, progesterone support in every cycle that you're trying to conceive in. You can be a little bit more aggressive if you still want to go the IUI path and do a hybrid protocol. A hybrid protocol means a combination of fertility pills like Clomid. I don't use Clomid in my practice. I use letrozole, also known as Femera, and you can overlap that with low-dose fertility shots like Gonal F or Follistim. This will help increase the number of eggs that you're ovulating and hopefully give you a better chance of getting pregnant with a healthy pregnancy. You're doing everything right, but my advice would be to consider switching gears if you feel comfortable with that from IUI to IVF, advocating for more tests on your uterus, ask potentially for a pelvic MRI to see if you have adenomyosis so that if you do, you can treat it before you get pregnant again. So thank you guys for all your thoughtful questions. If you'd like me to answer your question in a future episode, just head to asktheeggwhisperer.com and submit it there. And if you'd like to join me live where you can ask your questions in real time, I'd love to see you at my next IVF class. It's a class call with me, and the next one is happening this month, October 20th, and you can register at eggwhispererschool.com. What I'd like to do now is go to the questions that you guys have been asking live, and I'm going to scroll from the beginning, and I'm going to answer them as we go. So the first question that I saw on here was, hi, Dr. Amy. I have one golden euploid embryo. My RE is recommending a Lupron medicated transfer. What do you recommend, and what has been your most successful protocol regarding frozen FET? So when I make a plan for a patient, the plan I'm making for them is the exact same plan that I would want to do myself with everything that I know. And what that means is I don't want to put anything in my butt. That just sounds funny. I just had to say that. So when you're naturally producing progesterone from your ovary, your placenta is going to be healthier. You're going to have a lower risk of preeclampsia. You're going to have a lower risk of a condition called IUGR. You're going to have a lower risk of subchorionic hematomas. And you're not going to have big lumps on your butt. You're going to be able to walk around and your husband can still spank you and you won't be screaming, ow. So to answer your question, my preferred protocol in women who are ovulatory is the modified natural or natural cycle FET protocol. It doesn't mean that you're not going to supplement with progesterone, but you don't need to give yourself painful shots and cause lumps in your bum to have a higher chance of pregnancy. There is some suggestion in research studies that the modified natural actually gives you a higher chance of pregnancy. I think it's probably pretty equivalent, but I think the safer your pregnancy the better off you are. So that's why I choose this protocol. It's well tolerated with patients, and I think that, my pregnancy rates, I'm so lucky, are phenomenal. And most of my patients do the modified natural. Back in the old days, when I started my practice 15 years, actually it's been 18 years now, time certainly flies, but when I started my practice 18 years ago, we weren't ever doing natural cycles or modified naturals. But things have definitely changed with the times, and I think most practices know that the modified natural is superior. So let's go to the next question. I'm 36 and single, but the doctor said it's hard to preserve eggs rather than embryos. I gotta tell you, there's nothing hard about it. But this is what I tell my patients. At 36, what you should know is that an egg is a chance for an embryo. An embryo is a chance for a baby, and it can take many eggs to get one healthy embryo. If a 36-year-old patient comes to me, starting her egg freezing journey, I'll talk to her about how many kids she wants, how old she's going to be when she has her last baby. I'll think about what I know about her fertility today, and then I can project what I think her fertility will be at the age that she's going to be when she has her last baby. And I'll put a plan together for her. And what that plan involves is freezing enough eggs so that she can have over a 50% chance of having the most babies that she wants. I have patients who say they want 3. I have patients that say they want 2. I have patients that say that they want 1. So at 36, I would want at least 20 frozen eggs. You could potentially get that in one cycle. You might need to do 2 or 3. The other bit of advice that I have for women who are over 35 freezing their eggs is I ask them to consider making embryos if they get to an age where their eggs are starting to run out, before they lose the opportunity to learn about what's going on with their fertility. Let me just give you an example. So let's say you're 46 years old and you froze eggs when you were 36. At 46, you go back to thaw all your eggs and you learn that none of the embryos were viable. You didn't get any healthy embryos from those eggs. Most people will wish that they had known that before they were 46, because at 46, the likelihood of having a healthy egg is less than 1%, close to 0, if not 0. So I tell patients, look, if you're 36 freezing your eggs, and if by 39 you haven't started your family, maybe consider making embryos at that age to find out more about what's going on with your fertility. Then you'll know if you need to freeze more eggs or not. I'm all about what are the worst case scenarios. We talk about them up front. I want to prevent fertility regret, and I know that I can't prevent all of it, but I want to empower people with this information so you can think about these things for yourself when you're starting your egg freezing journey. Let's go to the next question. Next question is, what are the benefits of doing Lupron Depo, what I call devil Lupron, for 3 months, and birth control at the same time as the endosuppression? Doesn't the period cause inflammation? Again, that's a great question. So typically, if a patient's going to be on birth control while they're doing Depo Lupron, I actually have them take continuous birth control. I use a progesterone instead of a combination pill. I'll use norethindrone, and I'll have them take 2.5 milligrams per day. So if you get a period while you're on Depo Lupron, I don't think that that's worsening inflammation. The Depo Lupron is still working. So basically, it's not the period that is causing inflammation. So let me see if there's another question. Someone's saying that their son stops crying when he hears my voice. That's very sweet. Okay, next question is, at what age do you guide patients to donor eggs, or is it based on your numbers? That's a very personal question. So I think it has a lot to do with a patient's personal preference. So I present data to patients and I say, look, let's just take a 45-year-old. I say, at 45, the likelihood that we'll have a healthy embryo is less than 5%. However, if we use donor eggs, the likelihood of us having a healthy embryo is at least 85% if we're using a batch of donor eggs. Which option is right for you? Is it still important for you to try and see if you're going to be part of that less than 5% and be successful? Or Are you ready to move on and have a baby if it means not passing on your DNA? See how personal that is? It's not like an easy conversation to have. So I give patients choices and options, and then I will tell them when it's time to move on. When it's time to definitely move on is if you've tried IVF and you're not making mature eggs anymore, if they're not fertilizing anymore, and if you're not growing any viable embryos. If I have a cycle like that, and it happens because I'm just a medical doctor working with the DNA that people give me, I'm not able to reverse things. The damage that age does to our eggs as of today is still inevitable. I hope one day maybe I can take, there was that study that just came out and everyone's talking about. I think they took like some cells from a mouse tail and turned it into some sort of gamete, like an egg cell. That would be pretty cool if I could just take a biopsy from my patient's arm and not have to put her through medications. But until then, I still have to have these conversations. So it's really up to the patient. So if I have a cycle that is not successful and the things that I just shared with you happen to us, I'll tell them it is highly likely that what we're doing is not going to work the way we wanted it to, and it might be a good time to move on to egg donation. But if you want to try one more time, I will help and support you. And because I talk a lot, this is the only thing I know how to talk about. I don't know about anything else. I mean, I can barely get home. I have to put GPS on my car to get home because I'm just always focused on where an egg needs to go, where a sperm needs to go, where an embryo needs to go. I think being guided by someone who has your best interest in mind, I think is really important. Someone that will tell you the truth and not lie to you about what your chances are is really important. And then if you choose to take that chance, working with someone who won't bully you and make you feel ashamed for trying, even if the chance is, let's say, 1%. I had someone once, I won't say names, who felt like a little bit of cornering and said, like, I don't like that you're giving these patients who have a 1% chance a chance. And they said that to my face. And I basically said, well, it's really not up to you. If there's a patient that wants a 1% chance, I got to tell you, I'm going to work as hard for them as the patient who has an 85% chance, because I want them to feel closure if this doesn't work, that they were given every option, every chance to reach their goals, and then they'll feel like they can move on if that's something that they need to do. So let me see, I froze 27 eggs. I'm turning 39. Should I do a second egg retrieval? Smart to do a second cycle if quality might not be good now at 39. I mean, I think it would be smart. I think it'd be great to get another 29, and then hopefully you won't need to do another cycle. And then, like I said earlier, if, let's say, in the next 1 or 2 years, because clearly you're blessed and are very lucky to have such a high egg count, if, let's say, in a year or two, you're not in a situation where you're ready to get pregnant or make embryos, you might want to consider still making embryos with donor sperm just to see and learn about whether your eggs are viable or not. Next question is, will unhealthy eggs still implant? And the answer is, most of the time they will not. So an embryo that's chromosomally abnormal, once you transfer it and put it in the uterus, it stops growing pretty early on. However, there are some embryos that will attach for a very short period of time. That's called a biochemical pregnancy. And then you can also have embryos that grow to the point where you have a gestational sac, and that's called a clinical pregnancy. And then you can also have a pregnancy that, you might learn has a viable aneuploidy, something like trisomy 13. And sometimes those pregnancies can go on past the first trimester. And there are times where patients choose to electively end the pregnancy because of that. But most of the time, abnormal embryos will not implant. And the most likely scenario after that is a biochemical. And then after that, it will be a very early miscarriage, usually well before 10 weeks of pregnancy. So next question is there a great prenatal vitamin you would recommend with folic acid that's not the synthetic folic acid? I mean, I love the Tend prenatal bar. If you think about 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every day, I eat my Tend prenatal bar. It's not because I'm trying to get pregnant or thinking about pregnancy. It's because it's a snack and it has like everything I need in it. It has fiber, it has all the things, choline, all the vitamins that I need, and it's really tasty and really satisfying. So it's like my morning snack. So that's one prenatal that I recommend. And there's also the Theranatal that I recommend to my patients. There's so many great prenatals out there. I'm not sure what you mean about that's not the synthetic folic acid, but most of these have folate in it. And, in the end, they all kind of end up the same. So I recommend those two prenatals to my patients. Next question is, do you do phone consults? And the answer is yes. I have my medical license in all 50 states, and I take care of patients all over the world. So I'm able to do that, and I do that lovingly. And I love it when people reach out to me from all over. And, I like to also collaborate with physicians. So if you have a doctor that, is open to collaborating with me after I review your story and share my expert opinion and I share my advice, I do that quite often. So that's something that I love to do and I enjoy doing, working with other people. Okay, you guys, well, thank you again for joining me today. Hopefully you guys will join me next week. And until then, keep advocating for yourself, keep asking questions, and remember, you are stronger than you think. You all are. Thanks again. Have a great night.